After 2 failed marriages, single mom Rhonda Heaton of Hayden, Colorado, was feeling a bit discouraged. But that wasn't about to stop the 43-year-old dental assistant from looking for love.
When you get married, you expect to get married and stay married. And with already having been married twice, it really put a little pressure on me to think, I really want to do this forever.
So in the fall of 2005, Rhonda jumped into the online dating pool.
I started reading the profiles and looking at pictures. I was looking for someone who was very honest, caring and giving, someone that wasn't a drinker or a smoker.
Suddenly, Rhonda was drawn to the photo of a familiar-looking 51-year-old man named Robert Cash, a clerk at her neighborhood grocery store.
And I said, oh my gosh, I know who that is. I had seen him in the past and had noticed that he was always really bubbly at work.
Never one to wait, Rhonda left her phone number at the store for Bob, and a couple of days later, the two were sitting down at a restaurant to enjoy their first date.
He was just kind of old school and, like a gentleman from, back when they would open the doors for you.
And at over 6 feet tall, Bob was just Rhonda's type.
I've always been attracted to tall men, and so he was tall and, medium build.
As the two opened up to each other, Rhonda noticed some fun coincidences.
I had mentioned that I like motorcycles, and he had actually bought the motorcycle I was looking to purchase. And then I looked over at him, and we're both picking our tomatoes off of our sandwich exactly at the same time.
Rhonda shared that she was twice divorced with 2 teenage daughters, as Bob explained why he was single with no children.
He had told me that he was a caretaker for his mother. He was living in the same home where his mother had passed away the year before.
I was her caregiver.
I thought that was wonderful. Somebody that would devote their life to taking care of their parents.
But the clincher for Rhonda was when Bob told her he didn't drink.
Sorry about that.
I was really glad to hear that.
I don't drink.
Once I dated a young man that had a severe drinking problem, so I was looking for someone that didn't have those issues.
As the date ended, Rhonda couldn't help but feel she'd landed herself a keeper. And the feeling grew as the relationship took off at warp speed.
My mom was walking on water. I remember she'd come home every day, happier than ever. She was head over heels. She was in love.
So in November of 2005, 2 months and 2 days from their first date, Rhonda and Bob headed to the courthouse to make their union official.
We did it on the sly. I didn't even tell my children. It was kind of exciting.
I felt it was rushed. It was a surprise not knowing, but she could talk about nothing other than how happy she was.
The newlyweds were excited to start their new life together. So Rhonda and her daughters moved to Bob's house in Steamboat Springs, 24 miles away, to turn his bachelor pad into a sweet family home. Everything seemed perfect until the holidays came around.
Bob's sister had invited us over for Thanksgiving. They were having wine with the meal, and Bob's sister had asked Bob if he wanted a glass. And I said, Bob doesn't drink. And there was a very dead calm in the room. I could feel the awkwardness in the air, and then it just kind of got left at that.
But Rhonda couldn't shake the feeling that something strange was going on.
I thought, what do they know that I don't know?
And soon she would find out her new husband had some secrets.
She was scared to go back to the house. Something didn't feel right.
I was devastated. Things were spiraling out of control.
In November of 2005, after a stilted introduction to her new husband Bob's family, Rhonda Heaton focused on building a new life as a couple.
I thought that this was the one, and you always hope that's the person you'll be with until you die. Thought that was what I had found.
But just a few months into their marriage, Rhonda started to notice how her teetotaling husband had begun drinking.
He started bringing beer into the home, which, normally is not cause for concern. However, I had made it clear I didn't want to be with someone that drank.
When Rhonda asked him about it, Bob dismissed the occasional beer as just something to take the edge off a hard day at work.
I didn't want to make a big thing out of it, and I kind of took it on initially as it was more my problem than his because I was not comfortable with it.
But over the next few years, after Rhonda's daughters moved out on their own, Bob's drinking was getting out of control.
I would drive the vehicle and look for my sunglasses and find alcohol hidden in the glove box. And when I asked him why he was hiding alcohol, he said, well, sometimes I have a bad day at work and I need a drink before I come home. It concerned me because drinking and driving is so dangerous.
And Rhonda slowly watched her once loving husband become a belligerent bully.
He was very complimentary in the beginning, and then he was saying how fat I was or comments that were rude. It just was so out of character from what I thought he was like.
But the final nail in the coffin came in March of 2010.
Bob lost his job at the grocery store. We were in the middle of a pretty significant recession in the United States, and it was difficult for Bob to get another job. So the loss of that income, however modest it was, has put a strain on their relationship.
Now, Rhonda was the sole provider.
He was sitting at home drinking, and each day that I would come home from work, he would be more and more drunk. He wasn't talking to me about what was happening. It did hurt me. But I was hoping that maybe if he could seek help and get better, that maybe we could work through it, and I didn't want to be divorced again.
So Rhonda reached out to Bob's family for help. Little did she know just how eye-opening that would be.
I called his sister and said, there's a problem. I'm not getting through to him. That is when I found out that he had problems with alcohol in his past. And she said he has always had a drinking problem.
The family's awkward reaction at Thanksgiving now made sense to Rhonda. And it got worse. Rhonda was floored to learn that the story Bob had told her about taking care of his dying mother was a classic spin job.
His sister did say that Bob wasn't actually taking care of his mother, that his mother was actually taking care of him.
And now Rhonda was doing the same thing. Her huge-hearted husband was nothing more than a giant liar.
I don't believe in lying whatsoever. This was not the man I thought I had married, and it was time to go ahead and get out of the relationship.
So in April of 2010, after 4 years of marriage, Rhonda filed for divorce.
I felt bad for my mom. It was another marriage, another relationship, another man who had let her down.
And with Bob unemployed, Rhonda was unable to keep up with the mortgage payments on her own. So they had no choice but to put the house on the market.
I didn't really have anywhere to go, and Bob said that he didn't have anywhere to go either, and neither of us had financial means to move out of the home. So we ended up having to stay in the house together.
But in the weeks that followed, Rhonda's wise fiscal choice would cost her dearly when Bob decided to take matters into his own hands.
Nobody really thought he would do what he did.
He planned to do it step by step.
And I said, oh my God, get the ambulance, get the police.
In April of 2010, Rhonda Heaton filed for divorce from her husband Bob and waited for their home to sell.
I started sitting in my car in the parking lot after work until it was time to come home to go to bed because I didn't want to be in the home with him because he started having kind of peculiar behavior. He would follow me around the house as I did things and not ever be saying anything, just following me the whole time. I told the real estate agent that was selling our home, "You need to get me out of this house."
So Rhonda was grateful to her friend Jim when in June he offered to let her stay at his place in Vegas for a few days. But when Rhonda returned, Bob was waiting.
He was upset with me that I hadn't told him exactly where I went, but we were already filed for a divorce, so we weren't in a relationship.
Then one night when Rhonda came home from work, she got on the phone with Jim.
He was very concerned about me being in the home and thought it would be best if I didn't stay there, but I didn't have anywhere that I could go.
Rhonda thanked her friend, then glanced up to see Bob standing there.
Bob overheard me, and at the end of the phone call, I have a habit of saying "I love you" to my friends, and I think he mistook the way that I said it.
A few hours later, Rhonda crawled into bed, emotionally drained and ready for a good night's sleep. But at 6:30 a.m., Rhonda awoke to a shocking situation.
I heard the bedroom door open, and I could hear him walking into the room. And before I got a chance to ask him why he was in the room, I felt some type of impact. And I wasn't sure what was happening because in my mind, I was thinking there's an intruder. And I said, "Bob, what was that?"
His answer shook her to the core.
A shot.
And I said, "Oh my God, get the ambulance, get the police." And then he said, "No." And I said, "Why?" And he says,
I want you to die.
and that's when I realized what exactly had happened, that he had shot me in the back. I couldn't feel my hands at all. I couldn't feel from the knee down. He was pacing up and down in the room, and he was yelling and screaming at me. Just screaming at the top of his lungs.
Bob turned and left the room, leaving Rhonda bleeding in her bed alone. The man who'd once taken Rhonda's breath away was now trying to take her life away.
Rhonda said, "I don't want to die." Within seconds, a shot was fired.
And he says, "There's no going back now."
If you have a story for Who the Bleep and would like to appear on the series, go to investigation.discovery.com. On the morning of June 11th, 2010, Rhonda Heaton lay frozen in shock and fear after her husband Bob Cash shot her in the spine and left her to die.
I laid there and tried to decide, what am I going to do? I wasn't able to move, and I was watching the clock.
Suddenly, Bob returned.
Bob was coming in the room every 20 to 30 minutes and say the same thing.
Are you dead yet?
Every time he came in the room, I held my breath. I just kept telling myself, dead people don't move, and dead people don't breathe. I had so many thoughts. I just knew I couldn't leave this with my kids to live with, seeing their mother die this way.
Almost 2 hours after shooting Rhonda, Bob came in to check on her once again.
And he took my pulse on my neck. And I just kept praying that I was far enough gone that it wouldn't register. And I just held my breath. And he says, "Well, I guess you're dead now."
Bob left the room again, and before long, Rhonda heard a sharp pounding at the door. Her co-workers, concerned when she didn't show up for work, had called the police.
It was pounding so hard, and I thought, this is it. They're gonna come get me now, and it will be all right.
A few moments later, a shot rang out.
The officers didn't know where the shot was fired at, where it came from, but at that point they retreated to a secure location and called for backup.
A SWAT team arrived, and within minutes they burst through the doors. They found Rhonda clinging to life.
Surprisingly, she was talking and obviously very upset, but still, it's surprising to see somebody with a gunshot wound to the back and still being able to function.
Police discovered Bob in the other bedroom, barely alive. The gunshot they heard was Bob shooting himself.
He had a very obvious gunshot wound to his chest, right over his heart. The gun was laying on the bed next to him, near his hand.
Rhonda and Bob were taken to the nearest hospital. Inside the house, police discovered a series of notes Bob left, including one that began with, "Just lost it."
And he goes on saying why he lost it, what he heard on the phone call. He heard Rhonda say, "I love you." He said, "I lost my house, I lost my wife, I lost my job, I lost everything. I don't want to start again." I guess that was his confession.
Unbelievably, they both survived. And after painful surgery to remove the bullet near her spine, Rhonda walked out of the hospital just 3 to face with the man who tried to take her life.
It was terrifying. That was the first time since I had got shot that I was in the same room, and I didn't want to see him or hear his voice.
When Bob took the stand, he surprised everyone by claiming the shooting was an accident.
Bob testified that he was going to try and commit suicide in Rhonda's bedroom, but the gun accidentally went off inside the bedroom and it shot Rhonda. He kind of summed it up like, "I don't know how the gun went off, it just accidentally went off."
But the jury didn't buy it. Bob was convicted of attempted first-degree murder, and in April 2012, he was sentenced to 38 long years in prison.
He planned to do it step by step. Every action he took was planned. That is pure evil.
Bob was very cruel and unfeeling. Didn't seem to bother him that he was killing someone. And I live every day remembering. I don't ever stop remembering it.
Today, Rhonda still struggles with the aftermath of Bob's torture.
I don't like to have my back towards the door. I don't drive very far because I start having severe panic attacks. I don't trust people like I used to. If somebody you married is capable of this, what is everybody else capable of?
Even though she still bears scars, Rhonda doesn't let them define her.
I call it putting it on a shelf. It never goes away, ever. But you try to put it on a shelf because you have to keep going. You just make a new life.
My mom has a set of wings, and if you let them go, she'll fly. She's an amazing person. It makes your heart so happy.
And Rhonda even found new love, a nice, tall guy who proposed to her on a motorcycle ride.
I just feel an instant relaxation when we're out. I feel free. He makes me feel very safe and takes very good care of me. And so it's been a really good thing. I'm very happy.
In the summer of 1989, Kathleen Clark was busy climbing the corporate ladder as a stockbroker in Portsmouth, New Hampshire.
I was just 22 and the world was my oyster, you know, wasn't looking really to get married or even be in a relationship or anything like that.
But all that changed when she met a handsome coworker named Bruce Steinman.
Bruce was very shy and quiet, just a polite, kind, easygoing person. One day, he wrote me a note asking to go out to lunch. It was kind of cute that he had written a note. I was like, sure.
As the two chatted over lunch, Kathleen found herself intrigued by her date.
He just had an air about him that was different than other guys. It felt like he really wanted to woo me and impress me. We started doing everything together.
It was a whirlwind romance, and after 6 months of dating, Kathleen had no doubts when Bruce popped the question. Almost 2 years later, Kathleen and Bruce tied the knot on a gorgeous beach in Maine.
It was a beautiful day. I was very, very happy. All my friends were with me. It was an awesome, awesome day.
I could see how happy she was. They looked great together. It was just like a match made in heaven.
The happy couple settled down in a tiny New Hampshire town just 40 miles outside of Boston.
It was great. Bruce got a job that he liked in computer technology sales. I was thrilled with my new house. We had a really nice life.
5 years later, the two were overjoyed when they welcomed a son into the world.
We were very happy. Bruce was an awesome, awesome dad. He loved having a son, and he was very helpful.
They were always together. I definitely thought that they were the perfect American family.
Over the next 13 years, Kathleen kept the home fires burning, while Bruce's job in IT sales sent him on regular travel.
Bruce was gone more than he was home. But it was okay, it didn't bother me. You just get used to it. Our son and I were both very happy when Bruce would be coming home.
But by the spring of 2011, whenever Bruce was around, Kathleen found it harder and harder to keep his attention.
Bruce always liked his cell phone, but it became like almost an obsession. One night, we were at a friend's house for dinner, and the guys always go outside, and Bruce didn't even go out with them. He just stayed in the house, sitting on the couch, doing something on his phone. It became almost an embarrassment for me, to the point that I would say to him, "What are you doing on the phone?"
I'm just checking some work emails, but I just needed a few more minutes.
And after Bruce took on a new job, Kathleen noticed more bizarre behavior from her husband.
Bruce was still working with government sales, but he was going at least twice a month to the DC area. Right around that time, he started being very nitpicky with me over everything. One morning I came down and he had every cabinet, every drawer, everything wide open in the kitchen. And I knew that he didn't like that I didn't close the doors completely shut, but it was creepy to come down and see that he had done that. It was just odd behavior over insignificant things. And when I tried to talk to him about it, he would just pass it off. I'm under a lot of stress at work. So I'm like, maybe he is. I just didn't know what was going on with him. But I knew something was wrong.
And Kathleen would soon discover the sweet, affable man she married was really a cold-hearted snake.
There was something sinister going on.
He launched an attack. There was nothing that this man wouldn't do.
I was terrified. I knew my marriage was in trouble, but I never imagined that my son and I were in danger.
By the fall of 2011, Kathleen Steinman's happy 20-year marriage to her husband Bruce had taken a strange and disturbing turn.
I really had no idea what was causing the change. He was constantly on the phone. All of a sudden, it was like I couldn't do anything right. I couldn't say anything right. It just became very tense to be around him.
Kathleen told me that Bruce got very demanding. I just thought that they were going through a rough patch.
Soon, the tension between the Steinmans was unbearable.
When I would hear the car pull in, I could feel my stomach drop. I'm like, oh, he's home now. So I just stayed away because I knew he was going to try to find something to pick a fight with me about. Like, he'd walk in one door, I'd go out the other.
And Kathleen's friends noticed the change in Bruce, too.
I did have one friend who said maybe he's having an affair. But Bruce was very, quiet, not really an outgoing guy. I just never, ever imagined him ever having an affair.
But 2 days before Christmas, Kathleen had her first inkling that maybe her husband was hiding a secret.
I was down in the kitchen and his phone happened to be on the counter. And it buzzed and he had gotten a text and it just said, "Not sure if I'm going to be here."
Kathleen noticed the text was from a woman named Victoria.
It wasn't a name that I recognized. I just saw the text and thought, oh my God, is that a woman? Maybe he really is having an affair. So I took it upstairs and just handed him the phone and said, "You've got a text, are you having an affair?" And he said, "Of course not."
No, it's not.
I said, "Then who is the text from?"
Bruce humbly admitted that Victoria was a stripper friend of his buddy's, letting them know she wouldn't be dancing that night.
I was really upset. And he looked into my eyes and told me he would never, ever cheat on me. He wouldn't put me through anything like that.
I'm sorry.
It was really bizarre. I didn't believe what he had told me. It made me more suspicious.
But after the new year, her confidence was bolstered when the old Bruce seemed to be back.
Bruce had asked me to go out to dinner one night. He told me that he knew he hadn't been treating me right and things were gonna get better now. Something had changed. He seemed to be a little more back in tune with his family and family life again.
So on June 15th, 2012, when Bruce made plans to visit his mother in Massachusetts for the day, Kathleen trusted him completely.
Bruce had told me that he might be home late. I didn't sleep very well at all because I kept thinking he was coming in.
But the next morning, when she woke up alone, Kathleen realized Bruce hadn't come home at all.
I tried calling him, but I went right into voicemail and that was it. So it was very surprising because you couldn't pry the phone out of his hand for anything. I wasn't actually worried that something had happened to him. I was just angry at that point because Bruce had never done that before in the marriage.
Before Kathleen could gather her thoughts, the phone rang.
Bruce's brother called, which when I saw the caller ID was odd. His brother rarely called the house.
And he had some shocking news for Kathleen.
His brother said that Bruce had been arrested. I was just completely baffled.
When Bruce's brother revealed the alarming charges against her husband, Kathleen knew her world would never be the same.
He was like two totally different people.
This is crazy.
He just lost control.
I was absolutely shocked. And I thought, oh my God, what could he possibly have done?
On June 16th, 2012, Kathleen Steinman was beside herself when her brother-in-law told her that her husband Bruce was sitting in an Arlington, Virginia jail cell.
I thought, oh my God, what could he possibly have done? Bruce's brother told me that one of the charges was stalking. And the other one was unlawful filming of a nude person. So I knew that it involved another woman. All I could keep thinking was that he was having an affair.
Kathleen barely had a moment to collect her thoughts before Bruce called on the other line.
The first thing he said was,
I'm in jail.
and I said, you fell in love with another woman? And he said, of course not. I was tricked and
Of
duped.
course not.
I said, what did you do to this woman? Why did you do this? And he just kept saying, she owed me money, she owed me money. And he said, I'm gonna need help. And then we got disconnected.
Kathleen was left with nothing but a dial tone and a million questions.
I was totally shocked. I had no idea what was happening.
Desperate to learn more about her husband's case, Kathleen went searching the internet and made a shocking connection.
I did see the woman's name connected to his name and recognized it.
The woman Bruce had been charged with stalking was Victoria, the stripper who had texted him.
And I clicked on her name, and that's when I found all these porn websites. I thought, oh my gosh, it wasn't just a woman that he knew or had been having an affair with, it was actually a prostitute. To actually see it and watch it, it was very traumatic.
I was shocked. Bruce would be the last person in the world I would ever expect to do what he had done. I think Kathleen was blindsided.
The following week, Kathleen accepted Bruce's call from jail, but it wasn't quite what she expected.
He wanted money for bail. He said if you had been a better wife, this wouldn't have happened. He actually said, if you have an ounce of humanity, you'll help me. So he was just saying all the wrong things to me.
Listen to me, Kathleen.
After 21 years of marriage, Kathleen was done.
He was not the guy I thought I married. Nothing seemed to matter anymore except what he needed. I was angry. Anything he did to me, he's also doing to his son.
Kathleen told Bruce she wasn't bailing him out. She had something else in mind.
I told him I wanted a divorce, and he didn't like that.
I don't care what I've done. I don't care how I treated you.
He was almost belligerent. So it just made me angry that he was so selfish and so narcissistic.
But even behind bars, Bruce was able to use his allowed phone calls to wreak havoc on Kathleen's life.
The day after that phone call, my cell phone was shut off, and I just thought the bill was due and Bruce in jail and he didn't pay it, so that's why the phone was shut off. But then I started getting bounce check notices. So I called the bank, and they said, oh, the money was transferred out.
Kathleen was shocked to discover that Bruce had removed almost all of their savings.
Bruce had called the bank. He left me $250. I was so angry and confused, but I thought he was in jail and I was safe.
Then on July 3rd, Kathleen's cable and Wi-Fi went out too.
I knew it was Bruce. He did that in one swift move. I was completely done with this man.
But the following month, Kathleen received an unexpected visit from the local police department.
They had come to the house because Bruce actually did make bail and was released from jail.
Kathleen had no idea how, but the officers confirmed that Bruce was back in town and told her a little detail about his stalking charges.
Bruce had sent his mistress a dead snake. That act in itself was a lethal act, so law enforcement was afraid that Bruce may come after Kathleen next.
They suggested that I go and get a protective order immediately. I was terrified at that point.
There was no telling where Bruce was, but Kathleen would discover everything her husband had done to his mistress and what he had in store for her.
This was personal. He did everything he could to hurt her.
Every night, I would barricade all the doors. I never thought he could be that vicious and vengeful.
In July of 2012, Kathleen Steinman was horrified when police informed her that her estranged husband, Bruce, had made bail and was back in the area while awaiting trial.
I was granted a temporary protective order, but I was terrified.
And it seemed not even a protective order could put an end to Bruce's vengeful behavior. 2 weeks later, Kathleen and her son came home to something strange.
Everything seemed fine. We were sort of settling in, and I went to get the laptop and my phone, and they were missing. I knew it was Bruce. It was scary knowing that Bruce had been in the house. I didn't know if he had been coming and going before, so I called the police.
Things were escalating, so law enforcement came and they actually swept the house, sweeping it for monitoring devices.
Investigators found nothing, but Kathleen's growing involvement with police meant she was finally finding out exactly how her husband landed in jail, and it made her skin crawl. Detectives told Kathleen that Bruce met Victoria on one of his business flights.
At some point, the relationship went from a simple romance to a sexual relationship when she told him that the relationship was over. He did everything he could to hurt her.
He had in his mind to go after her however he could and inflict pain and revenge that he couldn't do in person.
And he did so with a vengeance. It turned out Victoria was not a prostitute at all.
The detective told me that Bruce created all those websites, making it look like she was a prostitute.
Bruce Steinman secretly filmed her and him having sex, then used these images on porn sites that he created, advertising her for sex.
Bruce included her employer's phone number, her boss's phone number, her home address.
A whole slew of people were coming to this woman's door seeking sex. She was very frightened.
That September, while Bruce was still awaiting trial, he set his sights on Kathleen.
Bruce started terrorizing me using the laptop he stole from me. He kept changing the password so that I couldn't access my own emails. He would listen to my voicemails and then delete them. I didn't know what he might do.
So Kathleen was thrilled when on November 9th, 2012, she learned from the Arlington Police Department that Bruce was arrested outside of Victoria's apartment.
One of the conditions for his release was he was to stay away from this woman. But he didn't want this. He was stalking her again. The police were staking out the apartment, and they caught him red-handed. He had on him a knife, which he had been using to slash her tires.
When I found out he was arrested again, I was like, thank God. I don't have to worry about that anymore.
In December 2012, Bruce Steinman pled guilty to attempted extortion, 2 counts of stalking, and felony identity theft. He was sentenced to 7 years in jail.
It's very difficult for me to come to terms with the fact that someone I love would be capable of doing these things to anyone, let alone his own child and to me. There's no answer for it. There's no reason for it.
Today, Kathleen is thankful that the 2 years of terror are finally over. But she can't help wondering what changed in Bruce.
Bruce isn't the same guy that I was married to. I don't know what's happened to him. He just doesn't exist anymore. This whole experience has been totally traumatic and unbelievable.
I think Kathleen is going to be cautious. But I think definitely she's made
Pacific Ocean not merely as a vast and seemingly endless expanse of deep blue water, but as an overwhelming, silent barrier that separates entirely different realities. In the heart of this immense aquatic desert lies an archipelago born of ancient volcanic fury, a place characterized by towering, jagged emerald peaks that pierce the tropical sky and deep, sheltered bays that have guarded secrets for centuries. This is American Samoa, or Eastern Samoa, a small and extraordinarily remote United States territory. Geographically and psychologically isolated from the rapid, chaotic pulse of the modern mainland, this island territory operates on a completely different rhythm. It is a place where time seems to slow down, dictated not by the relentless ticking of a clock, but by the steady, rhythmic crash of the ocean waves against the volcanic rock and the enduring, ancestral traditions that govern everyday life. With a population that fluctuates only slightly between 45,000 and 50,000 residents, American Samoa is a microcosm of human existence. It is an extremely closed ecosystem, a place where anonymity is an absolute impossibility and where the social fabric is woven so tightly that a single vibration is felt by the entire community. In a society this intimately connected, everyone knows everyone else. Families are inextricably linked by complex webs of genealogy, marriage, and shared history, creating an environment where a person's identity is entirely dependent on their relationship to their broader community. Because of this profound interconnectedness, the concept of crime and punishment on the island stands in stark contrast to the sprawling, anonymous cities of the American mainland. Violent, premeditated crimes of a severe nature are historically rare. The crimes that do occur are almost entirely spontaneous, born out of sudden emotional ruptures, intense family disputes, or complex disagreements over land and titles managed by the traditional chiefly system. In an environment so geographically isolated, the psychological pressure of living in a confined space can occasionally cause tempers to fracture. Yet, even when the law is broken, the aftermath rarely resembles a traditional police manhunt. There is simply nowhere to run, nowhere to hide, and no sea of strangers to disappear into. A perpetrator attempting to flee justice would only find themselves trapped by the unforgiving ocean. Consequently, those who commit offenses are almost always apprehended immediately, or, more commonly, they surrender themselves voluntarily to the authorities. This surrender is not just a legal process, but a deeply cultural one, heavily mediated and orchestrated by the Matai, the respected family chiefs. The Matai step in to negotiate, to soothe the burning tensions, and to prevent the devastating cycle of retaliatory violence from tearing families apart. The island relies heavily on this ancestral authority, a profound cultural trust that forms the bedrock of their societal peace. However, the history of this isolated paradise is not without its deep, permanent scars. Beneath the tranquil surface of island life, there are dark, devastating chapters where the peace was violently shattered, altering the course of the island's history forever. When extreme violence does erupt in such a serene and closed environment, it does not merely make the evening news, it shakes the very foundation of the society. It leaves an indelible stain on the collective memory of the people. This is a story about the fragile nature of peace and the devastating consequences of misunderstanding, tension, and betrayal. It is a narrative anchored by two distinct, horrifying days in the history of American Samoa, separated by more than 2 centuries, yet forever united by the profound shockwaves they sent through the local community and the wider world. These two events, though occurring in vastly different eras and under entirely different circumstances, serve as the definitive markers of the loss of innocence for an entire society. To understand the weight of these tragedies, one must look back to the dawn of Western contact with the islands, an era defined by bold exploration and tragic, fatal miscalculations. The first turning point occurred on a fateful day, December the 11th, in the year 1787. The setting was the stunningly beautiful Asu Bay on the island of Tutuila. Today, the pristine waters and lush surroundings mask the dark legacy of what transpired there, an event so gruesome that the bay would forever be remembered by a chilling moniker bestowed upon it by the survivors, Massacre Bay. At that time, a grand French scientific and exploratory expedition, led by the renowned navigator Jean-François de Galaup, Comte de la Perse, had arrived in the Pacific. The ships were massive, alien structures of wood and canvas that must have looked like floating islands to the indigenous population. Commanded by de Langley, a close personal friend of La Perse, the ship L'Astrolabe dropped its heavy iron anchors in the calm waters of Asu Bay. Their mission was practical: to replenish their dwindling supplies of fresh water before continuing their long voyage. Initially, the encounter between the seasoned European sailors and the local Samoan people appeared peaceful. There was a mutual curiosity, an exchange of glances, and the beginnings of what seemed to be a harmless trade. But beneath this fragile facade of calm interaction lay a vast, invisible chasm of cultural misunderstanding, a silent trap waiting to be sprung. The conflict that was about to drench the sands of Asu Bay in blood was not born of inherent, unprovoked malice from the indigenous people, as early European accounts might have suggested. Instead, it was the catastrophic result of a fundamental, irreconcilable difference in language, worldview, and, most crucially, the concept of property. To the indigenous Samoans, existing within a deeply communal society, the fascinating goods brought by the strangers, the shimmering glass beads, the strange and useful iron tools, were perceived through the lens of a gift economy. In their culture, materials were fluid, meant to be shared, exchanged, and utilized by the community as diplomatic offerings. To simply take an item was not a malicious crime, it was an interaction. To the French sailors, however, grounded in the rigid European laws of individual ownership and strict commerce, these actions were viewed unequivocally as blatant theft. This profound conceptual disconnect quickly bred suspicion and fear. In an attempt to assert dominance and protect their property, the French resorted to the only language they felt would be universally understood: the language of force. Warning shots were fired. The terrifying, thunderous sound of muskets echoed across the bay, serving as a harsh, unyielding declaration of boundaries. This reliance on force proved to be a fatal miscalculation. Just one day prior to the massacre, the tension had drawn its first blood when a Samoan was shot and injured by French sailors under the suspicion of thievery. In a tight-knit tribal society, an injury to one is an injury to all. The concept of justice was swift, deeply ingrained in the customs of the tribe, and demanded a balancing of the scales. What the French perceived as an unprovoked, savage ambush on the 11th of December was, in the eyes of the locals, a necessary and culturally mandated retaliation, a demand for justice for their wounded brother. The violence was overwhelming and absolute. 12 French sailors, including the expedition's commander, de Langley, were brutally killed on the shoreline, hopelessly outnumbered and overwhelmed by the fury of a people they had completely failed to understand. The blood of 39 Samoans also stained the beach, a testament to the heavy price of this cultural collision. The aftermath of this day reverberated far beyond the shores of Tutuila. La Perouse, grieving and horrified, recorded in his widely read journals that the Samoan people were inherently violent and deceitful. These harsh words, born of tragedy and misunderstanding, became the definitive narrative in Europe. Because of this single, bloody encounter, Western ships deliberately avoided the islands of Samoa for decades. The island was cast into a prolonged period of intense isolation, walled off from the encroaching modern world much longer than any of its Pacific neighbors. The tragedy at Massacre Bay was not just a loss of life. It was an event that altered the geopolitical timeline of the entire region. Centuries passed. The world modernized, empires rose and fell, and the isolation of American Samoa slowly gave way to the integration of modern legal systems and governance, heavily influenced by its status as a United States territory. Yet, the core of the island's soul, the profound reliance on the traditional Matai system, the deep respect for community order, and the innate belief in a fundamentally peaceful society, remained stubbornly intact. This enduring cultural foundation created an environment that felt extraordinarily safe, almost immune to the senseless violence that plagued the mainland. This sense of security was so deep, so absolute, that it shaped the very nature of law enforcement on the island. For generations, police officers on routine patrol in American Samoa did not carry firearms. The underlying philosophy was beautiful in its simplicity. The moral authority of the police uniform, combined with the powerful, underlying social control exerted by the family structures and the Matai, was deemed entirely sufficient to maintain the peace. Violence against an officer of the law was virtually unthinkable. It was a society that operated on profound, unspoken trust. But illusions, no matter how deeply cherished, are fragile things. If the tragedy of 1787 was a devastating clash between two alien cultures, the tragedy that unfolded in the summer of 2010 was a deeply intimate betrayal that struck at the very heart of the island's modern identity. Fast forward to July the 22nd, 2010. The setting is Fagatogo, the bustling administrative center of American Samoa. Unlike the isolated, rocky shores of Asu Bay, Fagatogo is a place of organized government activity. It is the hub where the modern machinery of the territory operates, where government buildings stand side by side, and where citizens gather daily for administrative and judicial matters. It is considered the safest, most secure, and most heavily monitored area on the entire island. At the center of this administrative heart stands the High Court of American Samoa, the ultimate symbol of law, order, and justice. On this particular day, the atmosphere was routine. Inside the courtroom, a trial had just concluded, resulting in an acquittal for a defendant involved in an assault case. Outside the building, standing his post, was Detective Lieutenant Lucilla Brown, a highly respected, deeply loved veteran of the police force with 19 years of dedicated, unblemished service. He stood there as a guardian of the peace, embodying the island's long-standing tradition of unarmed authority. He possessed no firearm, armed only with his standard-issue baton and the immense respect his uniform commanded. But on this day, the ancient cultural safeguards were not enough. The invisible shield of the Fa Samoa, the Samoan way of life that had protected officers for decades, was about to be shattered in broad daylight. Out of the crowd of citizens, a man fueled by blinding anger and deep-seated resentment toward the court's verdict approached the veteran detective. What happened next took only seconds, but it echoed across the territory with the same devastating impact as the muskets fired at Massacre Bay centuries earlier. The sudden, deafening crack of a concealed handgun tore through the peaceful air of Fagatogo. In an instant, the unimaginable became a horrific reality. This is not merely an examination of an ancient historical footnote or a procedural recount of a modern crime. It is an exploration of two profound ruptures in the fabric of an isolated society. We will delve deeply into the events that led to the shores of Asu Bay turning red with the blood of explorers and indigenous warriors, dissecting the fatal misunderstandings that cast American Samoa into decades of dark isolation. We will meticulously retrace the steps of the tragic morning in Fagatogo, exploring the agonizing vulnerability of a police force built on trust and the desperate, frantic moments when a dedicated public servant was gunned down on the steps of the highest court in the land. These two stories, bound by blood and separated by centuries, ask a haunting question. How does a society built on the principles of family, respect, and communal harmony process the sudden, jarring intrusion of devastating violence? The answers lie hidden in the historical journals of doomed explorers, in the complex, interwoven dynamics of the traditional chiefdoms, and in the solemn, tear-filled courtrooms of a territory forced to abandon its long-held innocence. The peace of American Samoa was broken twice, once by the arrival of the outside world, and once from within. This is the story of how those wounds were inflicted, how the island bled, and how the pursuit of justice forever transformed this remote corner of the Pacific. To truly comprehend the magnitude of these two separate tragedies, one must first understand the intricate tapestries of the worlds in which they occurred and the men who stood at the very center of these colliding forces. We must examine the starkly contrasting environments of the late 18th century and the early 21st century, exploring the unique psychological, cultural, and societal frameworks that define the lives of the victims. In both instances, the men who lost their lives were operating under deeply ingrained, yet ultimately fatal, assumptions about the rules of the societies they were navigating. Let us first travel back to the vast, uncharted expanse of the Pacific in the year 1787. The era of European enlightenment and exploration was in full momentum. Nations were sending their brightest navigators across the globe, driven by an insatiable thirst for scientific discovery, territorial expansion, and maritime supremacy. Leading the French vanguard was the esteemed Jean-François de Gallup, Comte de la Perse, a man whose name would become synonymous with both brilliant navigation and enduring maritime mystery. But beside him, commanding the formidable vessel L'Astrolabe, was his most trusted confidant and close friend, Commander Paul-Antoine Fleuriot de Langley. De Langley was not a mere subordinate. He was a highly capable leader, a seasoned mariner, and a representative of the rigid, structured world of European naval authority. He carried the heavy burden of keeping his crew alive, maintaining absolute discipline, and securing the necessary provisions to ensure the continuation of their historic voyage. When the L'Astrolabe anchored in the pristine waters of Aix Bay, de Langley found himself facing a society that was entirely alien to his European sensibilities. The indigenous people of Tutuila had lived in profound isolation from Western influence for centuries. Theirs was a deeply communal society, intricately structured around shared resources, mutual obligation, and collective survival. In this environment, the very concept of individual ownership, as dictated by Western law, simply did not exist. Resources belonged to the community, and the exchange of goods was not a commercial transaction, but rather a complex system of social bonding, diplomacy, and the establishment of relationships. It is within this profound cultural chasm that the tragedy of Commander de Langley and his men took root. When the French sailors brought ashore their fascinating foreign items, shimmering glass beads, sharp iron knives, and highly coveted metal tools, they viewed these objects strictly as currency, intended to be bartered for fresh water and food. But to the Samoan people, these extraordinary new materials were perceived through the lens of a gift economy. Taking these items was not considered a malicious act of theft. It was a culturally normalized action, a way of integrating the stranger's wealth into the community, an invitation to establish a reciprocal relationship. De Langley, bound by the strict codes of European property law and military discipline, could not fathom this perspective. To him and his crew, the actions of the indigenous people were blatant, unacceptable acts of thievery that threatened the safety and authority of the expedition. He was a man of his time, operating exactly as his training and culture demanded, completely unaware that his rigid adherence to European concepts of property was aggressively antagonizing a deeply proud and fiercely protective society. The 12 French sailors who eventually perished alongside him were, similarly, ordinary men far from home, caught in a fatal crossfire of incompatible worldviews. They were victims of a profound linguistic and cultural silence, a tragic inability to communicate the fundamental rules of existence. And we must also recognize the 39 Samoan individuals who fell on that beach. Though historical European accounts often marginalize their loss, they were defending their territory, their customs, and their people against an armed, incomprehensible force that had already drawn first blood by shooting a member of their community the day before. Now, let us move forward more than 2 centuries, leaving behind the sandy, blood-stained shores of Aix Bay to observe the paved, bustling streets of modern-day Fagatogo in the year 2010. The world had irrevocably changed. American Samoa was no longer an isolated, uncharted territory, but a vital part of the United States, complete with administrative buildings, asphalt roads, and a formal judicial system. Yet, despite the influx of modern infrastructure, the heart of the island remained deeply tethered to its ancestral roots. The core philosophy of the society was still heavily governed by the Whāamitai, the traditional chiefly system. It is here that we encounter our second victim, a man who represented the delicate balance between modern law enforcement and traditional island harmony. Detective Lieutenant Lucilla Brown was not a stranger to his community. He was a foundational pillar of it. With 19 years of dedicated, unblemished service to the American Samoa Police Force, he was a veteran officer who knew the faces, the families, and the intricate histories of the people he was sworn to protect. 19 years in a society where everyone knows everyone else meant that Lieutenant Brown was far more than just a man in a uniform. He was a mediator, a familiar presence, and a trusted figure in a tight-knit community where anonymity was impossible. The environment in which Lieutenant Brown operated was fundamentally different from any police precinct on the United States mainland. Prior to the devastating events of 2010, American Samoa maintained what was widely considered an exceptionally peaceful society. Violent, premeditated crime was an extreme rarity. This peace was not maintained by the threat of overwhelming police force or the heavy presence of armed patrols. Instead, it was sustained by a profound, island-wide reliance on the deterrence provided by the extended family structure and the unquestioned authority of the Matai, the family chiefs. The social fabric was woven so tightly that the shame and familial repercussions of committing a crime were often a stronger deterrent than the formal penal code. Because of this deep-seated belief in the power of social control, the legal framework of American Samoa dictated a deeply unconventional approach to law enforcement. Regular patrol officers, including veteran detectives like Lucilla Brown when performing certain duties, were not permitted to carry firearms. The underlying assumption was that the respect commanded by the police uniform, heavily reinforced by the traditional authority of the local chiefs, was an impenetrable shield. The government and the police force itself believed that a heavily armed presence was unnecessary and perhaps even contradictory to the peaceful ethos of the Matai. Therefore, when Detective Lieutenant Brown took his post outside the High Court of American Samoa in Fagatogo on that fateful July day, he was completely devoid of lethal defensive capabilities. He carried only a standard-issue baton. He stood in the administrative center of the island, outside the ultimate symbol of legal authority, enveloped in a false sense of absolute security. His vulnerability was not due to a lack of training or a failure of personal vigilance. It was a systemic vulnerability born from a collective, societal belief in inherent safety. He trusted the system. He trusted the cultural norms that had protected the island for generations. He stood his ground believing that the invisible armor of societal respect would always prevail over sudden, unhinged violence. The High Court in Fagatogo was considered the safest, most orderly location on the entire island. It was a place where disputes were meant to be settled through words, evidence, and judicial rulings, not through bloodshed. The area was typically crowded with citizens, lawyers, and government officials going about their daily routines. It was an environment that projected absolute stability. Lieutenant Brown, a seasoned officer with nearly 2 decades of experience navigating the complexities of island life, had no reason to suspect that the very courthouse he was protecting would become the site of his execution. When we look closely at both Commander de Langley and Detective Lieutenant Brown, despite the massive expanse of time, geography, and circumstance that separates them, a haunting parallel emerges. Both men were leaders in their respective fields. Both were operating in environments they believed they understood. De Langley trusted the superiority of his vessel and the universal language of European authority. Brown trusted the enduring peace of his island and the deep respect ingrained in his community. De Langley was entirely oblivious to the fact that his actions, dictated by foreign laws of property, were inciting a justified, culturally mandated retaliation from the indigenous population. He could not read the signs of the impending storm because he was looking at the world through a lens that did not apply to the shores of Tutuila. Similarly, Lieutenant Brown, representing the modern arm of the law, was standing in the open, completely exposed to the catastrophic failure of a legal system that had tragically overestimated the protective power of tradition. He was serving a government that had essentially sent its guardians into the world without the ultimate means to protect themselves, relying instead on the naive hope that the old ways would indefinitely hold back the tides of modern violence. The profiles of these victims are inextricably linked to the context of their surroundings. They were not merely individuals who found themselves in the wrong place at the wrong time. They were symbolic figures standing at the exact intersection where powerful, underlying social currents violently collided. The deaths of de Langley and his sailors marked the terrifying, bloody dawn of globalization and the catastrophic consequences of imposing one reality upon another. The death of Lieutenant Brown marked the heartbreaking, shattering conclusion of a community's innocence, a brutal realization that the walls of isolation and the bonds of tradition were no longer strong enough to keep the darkness at bay. To understand the crimes that took their lives, we must acknowledge the invisible forces that placed them directly in the path of destruction. The tragedy of December 11, 1787, did not materialize out of a vacuum. nor was it the product of a spontaneous moment of madness. It was, rather, the inevitable crescendo of a series of tense, escalating interactions that had been simmering since the L'astrolabe first dropped anchor in the serene, crystalline waters of Ace Bay. To understand the incident, one must immerse themselves in the stifling, humid atmosphere of that morning, where the air was heavy with more than just the scent of salt and vegetation. It was thick with the weight of two fundamentally incompatible civilizations hovering on the brink of a catastrophic collision. The French expedition, exhausted from their long, grueling journey across the vast Pacific, sought only the most basic of necessities, fresh water, and the opportunity to resupply. Commander de Langley, ever the diligent steward of his crew and his king, viewed the bay as a resource, a logistical checkpoint. For the Samoan people, however, the arrival of the massive wooden ships was a momentous, perhaps even divine or supernatural, event. The exchange of goods was not a matter of cold, commercial transaction but a profound ritual of social engagement. When the French sailors brought their tools and ornaments ashore, they were not just presenting items for trade. They were opening a door to a new relationship that they had no intention of actually conducting. As the morning progressed, the density of the crowd on the shoreline began to grow. The French, growing increasingly uncomfortable with the sheer number of indigenous people surrounding them, began to feel the tightening of a metaphorical noose. Every interaction was marked by a chillingly silent language barrier. A smile to a Frenchman might have been a gesture of peace, while to a Samoan, it was merely an acknowledgement of presence. The tension peaked as the French realized that items were disappearing from their possession. Tools, textiles, and personal effects were being claimed by the locals. In the rigid, uncompromising mind of Commander de Langley, this was theft. It was an assault on his authority and a direct violation of the sanctity of his expedition's property. He ordered his men to take a stand. They formed lines, their movements stiff and rehearsed, their hands gripping the cold, unyielding iron of their muskets. The warning shots were the first true act of violence, a thunderous, unnatural roar that broke the silence of the tropical paradise. It was meant to be a psychological blow, a terrifying demonstration of power that would force the locals back and reassert the French hierarchy. Instead, the thunder of the muskets only served to confirm the mounting fears of the Samoan people. The previous day, a local man had been shot and wounded by the sailors under the suspicion of theft. That singular act of violence had already set the wheels of tribal retribution in motion. In the intricate, interconnected society of the island, an injury to one was an injury to the entire lineage. When the French fired again, they were not just protecting their supplies, they were igniting a fuse that had been laid the moment the first drop of local blood was shed the day before. The reaction was swift, visceral, and overwhelming. The beach, previously a site of curious commerce, transformed into a chaotic theater of war. The Samoan people, defending their honor and their land with a fierce, tactical ingenuity of warriors, descended upon the French with a fury that no military training could have prepared the sailors to withstand. They did not rely on the clumsy, long-reload muskets of the Europeans. They used the environment, they used their numbers, and they used their intimate knowledge of the jagged volcanic terrain. Commander de Langley, in the midst of this rising tide of violence, became a primary target. As he stood his ground, a massive, heavy stone, hurled with lethal intent and terrifying precision, struck him squarely, sending him crashing into the surf. The water, so tranquil just moments before, became a murky, red-tinted grave. The sight of their commander falling sent a shockwave through the remaining French sailors. The discipline that had held them together on the long voyage across the sea dissolved in the face of the primal, overwhelming reality of combat at close quarters. They were being swarmed. 11 other sailors, scrambling in the sand, were brutally struck down before they could reach the relative safety of the small boats that were meant to carry them back to the mother ship. The screams, the heavy thuds of impact, and the sound of the ocean waves crashing against the shore created a cacophony of death. For those remaining on the L'Astrolabe, watching through their telescopes from the deck, it must have felt like a nightmare manifesting in the bright, unforgiving tropical sun. They were witnessing the extinction of their companions, a reality so horrific that it paralyzed their ability to intervene. By the time the dust settled and the final, lingering echoes of the violence faded into the rustle of the palm trees, the beach was no longer a place of trade. It was a site of mass slaughter. The total count was staggering. 12 French sailors, including the commander, lay dead, and 39 Samoan people had given their lives in the brutal exchange of justice and retaliation. The legacy of Asu Bay was etched into history not just in blood, but in the enduring silence that followed. For decades after the L'astrolabe sailed away, the name of the bay was transformed into a synonym for the treacherous, the dangerous, and the forbidden. Fast forward to the morning of July 22, 2010. The scene at Fagatogo could not have been more different from the primal beach battle of 1787, yet the underlying current of profound misunderstanding and erupting rage remained eerily similar. The High Court building stood as a silent, monolithic witness to the changing nature of the territory. It was meant to be the final bastion of order, the place where the chaotic passions of individuals were distilled into the measured, dispassionate language of the law. Detective Lieutenant Lucilla Brown, a man who had dedicated nearly 2 decades to maintaining that very order, stood outside the courthouse with the quiet, unassuming confidence of a man who believed in the inherent goodness of his community. He was the embodiment of the local ethos, a protector who did not need to wield a weapon to maintain peace, because he served a people who shared a common, unwritten code of conduct. The atmosphere around the courthouse that morning was characterized by a specific type of agitation. A trial had just concluded, and a verdict of acquittal had been delivered for a defendant in a high-profile assault case. In any other jurisdiction, such a verdict might be greeted with cheers or groans, but the reaction inside the Fagatogo courtroom was different. It carried the weight of family honor, of deep-seated clan rivalries, and the intense, pressurized emotions that can only exist in a small, isolated population where the lines between the personal and the political are blurred to the point of disappearance. Siamo Jr., a man inextricably caught in the gravitational pull of his family's involvement in the case, exited the courthouse not as a citizen accepting a legal outcome, but as a man whose internal sense of justice had been fundamentally offended. The security at the courthouse was predicated on the assumption that such intense, murderous rage was an impossibility. Detective Lieutenant Brown, positioned to ensure the orderly departure of those involved in the trial, did not perceive the danger until the final possible fraction of a second. He was watching the crowd, looking for the usual signs of civil unrest, a raised voice, a physical push, a tense standoff, but he was entirely unprepared for the sudden, cold, and calculated intrusion of lethal, modern weaponry into the middle of the administrative district. Siamo, carrying a concealed handgun, approached the veteran officer. There was no negotiation, no dialogue, no attempt to use the traditional authority that had once governed all disputes on the island. The silence between them was not a diplomatic pause. It was the final moment before the shattering of a long-standing social myth. The gunfire, when it erupted, was a jarring, discordant sound against the backdrop of the courthouse. It was a sound that had no place in the heart of Fagatogo. Lieutenant Brown, armed with nothing more than his training, his uniform, and his baton, stood no chance against the surprise of a ballistic assault. The shots rang out in rapid, agonizing succession. The first bullet struck the veteran, and the impact sent a tremor of disbelief through the bystanders who witnessed the scene. He crumbled to the ground, his 19 years of service ending in a pool of blood on the very steps he had sworn to protect. The violence did not end with him. Siamo, having successfully breached the ultimate line of security, continued his rampage, wounding 2 other officers who rushed to intervene. The scene was one of utter, blinding confusion. The sanctuary of the courthouse had been turned into a kill zone, and the very idea that American Samoa could exist in a state of perpetually peaceful, unarmed harmony was obliterated in the span of a few heartbeats. For the people of the territory, the shock of the event was compounded by the realization that their world had changed in an instant. The innocence that had been maintained by the Matai system, the reliance on family shame as a deterrent, and the deeply held belief that a community built on shared roots was inherently immune to such outbursts. All of it was called into question. The murder of Lieutenant Brown was not just the killing of a policeman, it was the killing of a foundational ideal. The community stood frozen in the wake of the incident, forced to reconcile the peaceful, orderly life they cherished with the grim, brutal reality of what had transpired on their own doorstep. The streets of Fagatogo, once a place where one could walk in safety, became a somber reminder of the fragility of that safety. This was not a clash of two different civilizations, as it had been on the shores of Asa Bay. It was an internal rupture, a devastating admission that the modern world had finally caught up to the island, and the old ways were no longer enough to keep the darkness at bay. The blood on the steps of the High Court was the price of that realization, a heavy, permanent cost that would force the territory to confront a new, more guarded, and ultimately more dangerous future. The echoes of the gunshots at Asa Bay and the gunfire at Fagatogo, centuries apart, merged into a single, sorrowful chorus that told the story of a lost, beautiful, and ultimately unattainable peace. The aftermath of the bloodshed in Fagatogo was not merely a tactical inquiry into the failures of courthouse security. It was a profound, soul-searching investigation into the very survival of the American Samoan way of life. When the smoke cleared from the steps of the High Court and the initial, paralyzing shock began to recede, the territory found itself thrust into a cold, clinical process that it was fundamentally ill-equipped to handle. The investigation into the assassination of Detective Lieutenant Lucilla Brown required a level of forensic rigor and procedural speed that the local authorities, accustomed to a culture where crimes were often mediated by family heads, had never before been forced to execute under such intense, international scrutiny. This was a direct strike at the heart of the government, an act of defiance that could not be swept under the rug or settled through the traditional, quiet reconciliation of the Matai. The perpetrator, Siamo Jr., did not melt back into the familiar, protective arms of his clan. He was captured, and the ensuing legal machinery began to grind, revealing the immense strain placed on a small, insular legal system that had suddenly become the epicenter of a high-stakes, violent criminal prosecution. The investigation began by picking up the scattered, traumatic fragments of the day. Every witness statement taken in the aftermath reflected a community in the throes of a psychological breakdown. The people of Fagatogo, who had been mere feet away from the gunfire, were not just witnesses. They were fellow community members who felt the personal violation of the event. Detectives struggled to collect evidence from a scene where the lines between the public administrative area and the private social sphere had been blurred by the violence. They were not tracking a stranger through a city of millions. They were identifying an individual who belonged to a lineage that was well known throughout the island. The pressure to maintain procedural integrity while navigating the complex, traditional social networks was immense. Every step taken by the investigative team was scrutinized by a public that was desperate for a sense of normalcy to return, yet equally fearful of the implications of what this meant for their future. The firearm used in the murder became the central piece of evidence, a grim, alien object that stood in stark contrast to the traditional, non-lethal tools of law enforcement that had been the pride of the territory for generations. As the investigation deepened, it uncovered the uncomfortable reality of the perpetrator's motivation, an unhinged reaction to a judicial verdict that had not gone his way. This was not a calculated political assassination, but a raw, impulsive eruption of violence that exposed the volatility of a small society under pressure. The process of building the case required the investigators to peel back the layers of local grievances and family conflicts that had culminated in that day. It was a painstaking task, made more difficult by the fact that the entire island was grieving the loss of one of its most respected protectors. Lieutenant Brown was not just a police officer. He was a husband, a father, and a neighbor. His funeral was a massive, somber affair that brought the entire territory to a standstill, and the sight of the rows of uniforms behind his casket served as a visceral reminder of the danger that now haunted their once safe streets. The investigators knew that this was not just a case of murder. It was the case that would determine whether the rule of law in American Samoa could withstand the encroachment of modern, senseless violence. The legal journey that followed the initial investigation was, in many ways, just as agonizing as the crime itself. For years, the case against Siamo dragged through a series of legal motions, continuances, and procedural hurdles that kept the memory of the trauma alive and raw for the entire community. It was a process that tested the resilience of the local judiciary. Every postponement of the trial was felt as a personal affront to the family of Lieutenant Brown and a sign of weakness in the face of such a direct attack on their institutions. The public became increasingly impatient, their calls for justice growing louder as the details of the investigation were aired in the media, keeping the horror of the event in the headlines. The complexity of managing such a high-profile case in a place where the judge, the prosecutor, and the defense attorney might share mutual acquaintances or distant familial ties created an environment of intense, constant pressure. The integrity of the judicial process had to be shielded from the overwhelming, collective emotion of the island. This period was marked by an internal struggle for the soul of the territory. On one side, there was the lingering, idealistic belief in the old ways of the Fa'amatai, the hope that justice could be dealt with through community reconciliation and the slow, deliberate processes of the elders. On the other side was the harsh, modern reality that this was no longer enough. The brutal murder of a police officer had changed the game. It had necessitated a shift towards a more rigid, punitive, and formal application of law, one that could not be negotiated behind closed doors by the Matai. The transition was painful, and the investigation into the crime was the catalyst that accelerated this fundamental, irreversible change. It was a period of profound uncertainty, where the traditional, soft power of the chiefs was increasingly being supplemented, and in some areas replaced, by the hard, armored reality of a modern police state. The investigation was also a deep dive into the failure of the no-guns policy that had been a pillar of the territory's identity. The forensic report on the shooting was a document of failure, not by the officers involved, but by the systemic, institutional decisions that had left them exposed. It documented the lack of ballistic protection, the absence of lethal defense options, and the catastrophic gap between the reality of the threat and the readiness of the force. For the investigators and the public alike, these findings were a harsh indictment of the status quo. The process of gathering evidence and documenting the crime scene became a quiet, devastating argument for reform. It was as if every bullet hole that had to be marked and every shell casing that had to be recovered was a silent, insistent voice demanding that the days of naive vulnerability come to an end. The detectives, many of whom were friends of the fallen lieutenant, had to carry out their duties with a heavy, professional detachment, even as they felt the deep, personal impact of what they were uncovering. During this time, the internal dynamics of the community were tested in ways that had never been seen before. The tension between the need for swift, public justice and the desire for social cohesion was at an all-time high. The investigative team had to walk a narrow, treacherous line, ensuring that the evidence against Siamo was collected with perfect, unimpeachable accuracy to withstand the inevitable challenges of a lengthy, public trial, all while maintaining the trust of a community that was deeply divided on how to move forward. The case became a mirror, reflecting all the anxieties of a population that realized the outside world had finally, irrevocably breached their borders. The investigation into the assassination of Lucilla Brown was the definitive turning point in this transition. It exposed the vulnerabilities that had always been there, hidden beneath the surface of the idyllic, Pacific life, and proved that the old, communal ways of managing human conflict were no longer sufficient to contain the modern, violent impulses that had arrived on their shores. The long, drawn-out process of preparing for the trial was not just about the guilt or innocence of one man. It was about the territory's ability to define its own future in a world that was no longer as safe or as simple as it once was. As the years passed and the trial finally neared its conclusion, the memory of that day in July remained as sharp as ever, a haunting reminder that the peace they had lost was not something that could ever be truly regained. The investigative efforts, the long, slow accumulation of facts and testimonies, were the final, necessary steps in acknowledging the end of their era of innocence, a painful process of growing up that left no one untouched, and that forever changed the way the territory interacted with the very ideas of justice, power, and safety. The case of the High Court shooting was not just a singular event to be solved and filed away. It was the closing of a long, historic chapter, a final, bloody lesson that would dictate the future of American Samoa for generations to come. The investigation was the crucible in which the modern legal identity of the territory was forged, amidst the ashes of a dream of perpetual, unarmed harmony, leaving a lasting, indelible mark on the landscape of their collective history. The courtroom, a structure of modern governance nestled in the administrative heart of Fagatogo, became the stage for the final, somber act of the tragedy that had so deeply scarred American Samoa. The judicial process following the assassination of Detective Lieutenant Lucilla Brown was not merely a criminal trial. It was a societal exorcism, an attempt to process a collective grief that had persisted for years while the legal machinery slowly ground toward a resolution. Inside the courtroom, the air was thick with the weight of expectation and the lingering, raw pain of a community that had seen its illusions shattered in a heartbeat. Every session served as a stark reminder of the void left by the fallen officer, whose absence was felt as acutely as if the wound were fresh. The prosecution, tasked with the heavy responsibility of securing justice for a man who had been a friend, neighbor, and protector to so many, presented their case with a meticulous, grim focus. They meticulously laid out the sequence of events that had turned a routine day at the High Court into a theater of death, bringing forward evidence that detailed the deliberate, calculated nature of the assault. The witnesses, many of whom were individuals who had been present on that horrific July morning, were forced to recount the terror, the confusion, and the sight of their trusted officer being gunned down on the steps of the very building that represented the law. Their testimony was not just evidence in a trial, it was a public declaration of the trauma that had defined their lives since that day. The defense, meanwhile, navigated the near-impossible task of representing a man whose actions were universally condemned by the society he lived in. They faced a public gallery filled with people who knew the victim personally, creating an atmosphere of intense, suffocating pressure that filled every corner of the courtroom. The judge, an arbiter of law in a territory deeply sensitive to the sanctity of communal bonds, had to maintain an absolute, unwavering impartiality, ensuring that the legal process remained untainted by the intense, swirling emotions that threatened to consume the proceedings. The trial lasted for years, marked by an agonizing cadence of motions, delays, and procedural intricacies that kept the community in a state of suspended animation. Every motion for a continuance, every challenge to the evidence, and every procedural hurdle was met with a mixture of impatience and profound, quiet sorrow by the public. For the family of Lieutenant Brown, the legal battle was a marathon of grief, a seemingly endless series of reminders of the day their loved one was taken from them. They sat in the courtroom, their faces a portrait of silent endurance, representing the dignity of a society that was trying to find a path toward justice in the wake of an incomprehensible loss. The prosecution's presentation of the ballistic evidence was a technical, cold-blooded accounting of the violence that had been unleashed, a document that stripped away any remaining romantic notions about the incident. They traced the trajectory of the bullets, the proximity of the shooter, and the total inability of the victim to defend himself, building a narrative that left no room for doubt about the intent and the callousness of the act. The jury, comprised of members of the community who had lived through the trauma, were tasked with the impossible weight of representing the collective will of the territory. They were not distant, impartial observers from another land. They were neighbors, colleagues, and friends of the people who had lost so much, and their burden was to transform that collective pain into a verdict that held the perpetrator accountable while honoring the memory of the fallen officer. As the testimony progressed, the focus shifted from the mere facts of the crime to the broader, existential implications of what the act had done to the island's way of life. The courtroom became a microcosm of the territory itself, a place where the old, communal ways of managing conflict were forced to confront the modern, unforgiving realities of criminal justice. The defense's arguments, which touched upon the psychological state of the accused and the tensions surrounding the previous trial, were received not with sympathy, but with a sense of grim, historical recognition. The trial exposed the volatile, interconnected nature of the island's social fabric, revealing how the unresolved grievances and personal conflicts of a few could escalate into a tragedy that impacted everyone. The courtroom was the place where the myth of an inherently peaceful, self-regulating society was finally, formally laid to rest. The prosecution, with each piece of testimony, effectively dismantled the idea that traditional social controls were sufficient to curb the influence of modern violence, arguing for a new, stricter standard of justice that reflected the harsh reality of their changing world. The closing arguments were a somber reflection on the loss of innocence, a final, deliberate attempt to frame the murder of Lucilla Brown not as an isolated incident, but as the end of a long, historic era of stability. When the trial finally reached its climax in 2016, the atmosphere in Fagatogo was one of profound, heavy anticipation. The verdict was not merely a decision on the guilt or innocence of Siamo Jr. It was an affirmation of the territory's commitment to the rule of law in a world that no longer offered the protection of isolation. When the jury returned with a conviction of life imprisonment, it was met with a sense of grim, resolute acceptance. There were no cheers, no celebrations, only a quiet, solemn recognition that the legal process had finally served its purpose. The sentencing was the final, formal acknowledgement of the severity of the crime and the irrevocable nature of the loss. For the community, the long years of waiting had been a period of profound, difficult adjustment, as they had been forced to reconcile their identity as a peace-loving, community-oriented people with the reality that they were now living in a more guarded, cautious world. The conviction did not bring back the officer, nor did it erase the trauma of the incident, but it provided a necessary sense of closure, a formal, public recognition of the gravity of the violation. The High Court, the very place where the tragedy had occurred, became the place where the final chapter of the legal battle was written, closing a narrative that had begun with the shattering of a dream. The legal process had been a mirror, reflecting all the anxieties, the fears, and the hopes of a population that realized the outside world had finally breached their borders in a way that could never be repaired. The court proceedings were a testament to the resilience of the local judiciary, who had stood firm against the overwhelming emotional tide of the territory to ensure that justice was served with the necessary, rigid formality. The trial had forced the people to confront the darkest aspects of their own community, to look at the volatility that had always been hidden beneath the surface of their communal life. It was a painful, necessary exercise in self-awareness, a realization that the traditional, soft power of the chiefs was no longer enough to contain the forces that had arrived with the modern age. The conviction of Siamo was the definitive, final step in this transition, marking the end of a long, historic period where the island had maintained an, at times, precarious peace based on the strength of its ancestral traditions. As the courtroom doors finally closed on the case, the territory stood at the threshold of a new, more guarded future, carrying the burden of their history while striving to find a way to maintain their values in a world that was becoming increasingly complex and dangerous. The legal resolution of the assassination of Lucilla Brown was the ultimate, formal punctuation mark on the end of a long era of innocence, a grim and necessary conclusion that would forever influence how the island defined itself, how it maintained its order, and how it remembered the sacrifice of the man who had been its most dedicated guardian. The trial had done more than just decide the fate of a man. It had forced an entire territory to look in the mirror and acknowledge that the life they had known, the world they had cherished, was fundamentally, permanently altered. The weight of the final verdict was felt by every citizen on the island, a heavy, silent acknowledgement of the price that had been paid for their transition into the modern world. The echoes of the tragedy that shattered the peace of Fagatogo in 2010 still resonate deeply within the collective consciousness of American Samoa, serving as a permanent, haunting reminder of the fragility of the societal order the island once held as immutable. This event did not simply pass into the archives of historical record. It fundamentally reorganized the DNA of the territory's relationship with safety, authority, and the rule of law. The consequences of that fateful day were both immediate and structural, forcing a long overdue reckoning with the realities of the modern world. Perhaps the most tangible and visible legacy of the assassination was the abrupt, urgent mandate to transform the capabilities of the island's law enforcement. For generations, the absence of firearms had been a point of pride, a reflection of the deep-seated trust in the traditional chiefly system and the moral weight of the badge. That era, defined by a serene, if perhaps naive, belief in the inherent goodness of the community, was extinguished in the flash of a handgun. The Fono, the territory's legislative body, acted with unprecedented speed following the murder, recognizing that the era of unarmed patrol was a lethal liability. They passed emergency legislation that finally authorized and funded the training and equipping of police officers with standard-issue sidearms. This was not a change made with joy. It was a painful, somber acknowledgement that the world had reached the shores of Tutuila in the most violent way possible. The uniform, which once commanded respect through its simplicity and moral authority, now became synonymous with a new, armored reality, as the sight of officers carrying weapons on their belts became a permanent, daily fixture of island life. This institutional shift was not merely a change in equipment, it was a profound psychological adjustment for the entire population. The people of American Samoa had to reconcile their cherished identity as a peaceful, community-oriented society with the grim, daily presence of armed authority. It forced at times, difficult and uncomfortable conversation about what it meant to be a modern territory under the American flag, while struggling to preserve the essence of the FA Samoa. The police force, too, underwent a metamorphosis. Training programs that had previously focused on community mediation and traditional de-escalation were rapidly expanded to include rigorous, high-stress firearms training and tactical response protocols. The profession itself changed. It became more clinical, more distant, and more focused on the hard, legal requirements of protecting the peace in an environment that was no longer immune to the dangers of the mainland. The death of Lieutenant Brown served as the grim catalyst that moved the island into a new, more guarded phase of its history, where the possibility of sudden, senseless violence was no longer a myth of the outside world, but a constant, vigilant reality that had to be managed every single day. Beyond the institutional changes, the impact on the spirit of the community was profound and lasting. The assassination became a cornerstone of the island's modern narrative, a shared trauma that served as a baseline for measuring the evolution of their society. It fostered a heightened, persistent sense of caution that had not existed before. The casual, open nature of administrative centers like Fagatogo, which had once been bustling, porous areas, gradually tightened under stricter security protocols. The transition was a silent, creeping change, as security checkpoints, restricted access points, and increased surveillance became the new, normalized standard. This was the price paid for the loss of the innocence that had once been the pride of the territory. The community realized, with a deep and lingering sorrow, that the walls they had once relied upon, the ancestral structures, the familial bonds, the collective shaming of bad actors, were no longer sufficient to shield them from the currents of a changing, more dangerous world. The memory of Lieutenant Brown, a man who represented the best of their traditional ideals, became a symbol of a bygone time, a standard against which all future protection was measured. Reflecting on the history of this territory, one cannot help but draw a sobering line from the blood-soaked sands of Asu Bay in 1787 to the steps of the High Court in 2010. These two events, separated by more than 2 centuries, are not merely coincidental tragedies. They are the definitive, bookending chapters of a long, historic arc of isolation and integration. The massacre at Asu Bay was the violent, traumatic dawn of contact, the moment the island first felt the crushing, unforgiving pressure of an external power that it could not understand. It set the tone for a period of defensive isolation, where the island attempted to hide from the world, maintaining its own, traditional rhythm for as long as possible. The assassination of Lucilla Brown, however, represented the definitive, agonizing conclusion of that era. It was the moment the world finally completely caught up to the island, breaching its interior and forcing it to accept that no amount of traditional wisdom or communal harmony could permanently stop the encroachment of modern, individualistic, and occasionally lethal pressures. The tragedy of both events lies in the fatal, persistent misunderstanding of the other's reality. The French in 1787 were blinded by their rigid, European sense of property and their assumption of superiority, failing to see the indigenous perspective that had been violated long before the muskets were fired. Similarly, the modern territory in 2010 was blinded by its long, sustained success with a nonviolent order, failing to see that the pressures of the modern world had begun to erode the very social fabric that provided that safety. In both instances, the victims were individuals who were operating within a framework that had been superseded by events they could not foresee or control. They were the casualties of a society that was forced to confront the harsh, immutable reality that peace is never guaranteed and that the methods of the past are rarely sufficient to secure the future. The legacy of these tragedies is a territory that has learned the hardest lessons of the modern world, not through the peaceful evolution of ideas, but through the visceral, life-altering experience of blood on its own soil. Today, American Samoa stands as a place where the resilience of the local culture is tested daily against the requirements of modern security. The inhabitants carry the weight of their history with a quiet, solemn strength, fully aware that they have lost a kind of paradise that will never exist again. They have transformed the memory of their loss into a vigil, a commitment to maintaining the safety and the dignity of their community, even while the world around them grows increasingly complex. The lessons learned from the sacrifice of Lieutenant Brown and the tragic, doomed sailors of the L'astrolabe are now woven into the very structure of their government, their law enforcement, and their daily life. They move forward with a more measured, realistic, and hardened perspective, having traded their long-held, idealistic innocence for a more durable, if less comfortable, form of reality. The story of American Samoa is not a story of permanent defeat, but one of profound, painful, and necessary adaptation. It is the story of a people who have had to define themselves in the aftermath of their worst moments, finding a way to continue their path, honor their traditions, and survive in a world that no longer offers the sanctuary of the unknown. As the Pacific waves continue their constant, rhythmic beating against the volcanic rocks of Tutuila, the memories of the bay and the courthouse remain as the permanent, unyielding anchors of the island's collective soul, reminding every generation of the price of their peace and the constant, eternal vigilance required to protect it. The story of this territory is a testament to the fact that while innocence can be lost, the strength of a community, once tempered by the fire of tragedy, can endure even in the face of the most devastating change. The peace of American Samoa remains, not as a gift of nature, but as a hard-won, cherished achievement, one that is defended now with a clear-eyed understanding of the costs of failure and a deep, enduring respect for those who gave their lives at the dawn and the twilight of their age of innocence. The final chapter of this narrative regarding American Samoa is not found in a court transcript or a historical logbook, but in the enduring spirit of a people who have been forced to reconcile their ancestral identity with the relentless, encroaching realities of the 21st century. When we reflect upon the long trajectory from the shores of Asu Bay to the steps of the High Court in Fagatogo, we are not simply looking at two isolated, albeit horrific, crimes. We are witnessing the evolution of a society that has had to endure the agonizing erosion of its own isolation. The loss of innocence in American Samoa was not a singular event. It was a slow, inevitable process that reached its zenith in the cold, calculated violence of 2010. The territory now exists in a state of perpetual awareness, a place where the memory of the past serves as both a foundation and a cautionary tale. The transition from a society governed by the implicit, soft power of the Matai to one that must also rely on the explicit, hard power of the law is complete, yet it remains a point of deep, lingering reflection for the community. The transition was not desired, nor was it particularly graceful. It was a survival necessity dictated by the changing nature of human interaction in an era where distance is no longer a barrier to conflict. The legacy of the assassination of Detective Lieutenant Lucilla Brown has become the central, definitive touchstone for this new reality. In the years that have followed his death, the territory has had to redefine what it means to be a guardian of the peace. The police department, once a symbol of trust and traditional authority, has undergone a comprehensive and painful redesign. This evolution was not just about the introduction of firearms, it was about adopting a new, more professionalized, and systematic approach to law enforcement that could withstand the pressures of modern criminal activity. The officers who patrol the streets of Fagatogo today walk a path that is fundamentally different from that of their predecessors. They are more tactically prepared, more forensic-minded, and more acutely aware of their own vulnerability. They operate under a set of rules that acknowledge the reality that the shield of tradition is no longer enough to stop a bullet. This has created a new, complex dynamic between the police and the public. The trust remains, but it is now tempered by a more realistic, guarded understanding of the threats that exist within their own community. The community has had to accept that their territory is no longer a secluded sanctuary, but a small, interconnected part of a global society where the same dangers that haunt the mainland can, and occasionally do, manifest on their shores. This realization has forced a reconfiguration of the public space, especially in administrative centers like Fagatogo. The transformation of the courthouse and the surrounding government buildings into more secured, monitored environments was a physical manifestation of this new, cautious mindset. Every security checkpoint and every surveillance camera is a silent testament to the memory of the day the peace was shattered. For the older generations who remember the time before the shift, these physical changes are constant, stinging reminders of a life that was once more open and, in their view, more authentic to their traditions. For the younger generations, this reality is simply the status quo, the natural environment in which they have always lived. This generational gap in the perception of security is itself a reflection of the profound change the territory has undergone. It is a society that is effectively living in two different worlds: the world of their ancestors, where disputes were settled in the Fail under the guidance of elders, and the world of the present, where the rule of law must be upheld by the state with all the formal, often impersonal mechanisms of modern justice. The story of the violence at Asu Bay and the assassination in Fagatogo serves as a somber lens through which the island evaluates its future. There is a deep, abiding commitment to maintaining the traditional Fa Asamoah, a desire to ensure that the influx of foreign influences does not completely wash away the core values that have defined the people for centuries. Yet, there is an equally strong, pragmatic acknowledgement that they cannot revert to a state of total isolation. The tragedy of the past has provided the territory with a clear-eyed understanding of the costs of failure. It has taught them that the price of neglecting the realities of the modern world can be the loss of the very peace they hold so dear. This has led to a more deliberate, thoughtful engagement with the rest of the world, a balancing act where the territory seeks to benefit from the advantages of modern integration while strenuously defending the integrity of its traditional social structures. The memory of the victims in these two historical markers, the French sailors and the Samoan warriors, the beloved police officer and the tragic perpetrator, all of them remain, in their own way, as the silent teachers of this new, hard-won wisdom. The resilience of the American Samoan people is rooted in their ability to process these collective wounds without losing their identity. They have refused to let the brutality of the past define their present, instead choosing to integrate the lessons of their history into the fabric of their daily existence. They have transformed the memory of their loss into a vigil, a commitment to maintaining the safety and the dignity of their community, even while the world around them grows increasingly complex. The story of this territory is not a story of permanent defeat, but one of profound, painful, and necessary adaptation. It is the story of a people who have had to define themselves in the aftermath of their worst moments, finding a way to continue their path, honor their traditions, and survive in a world that no longer offers the sanctuary of the unknown. As the Pacific waves continue their constant, rhythmic beating against the volcanic rocks of Tutuila, the memories of the bay and the courthouse remain as the permanent, unyielding anchors of the island's collective soul, reminding every generation of the price of their peace and the constant, eternal vigilance required to protect it. Looking ahead, the territory is poised at a crossroads, balancing the preservation of its heritage with the demands of the 21st century. The lessons of the past, that cultural misunderstandings can lead to catastrophic violence, and that naivety regarding the modern world can have lethal consequences, are now the foundation upon which they build their future. They are no longer a people who believe in an inevitable, perpetual peace, but a people who understand that peace is a fragile, valuable accomplishment that must be nurtured, protected, and defended every day. This shift in perspective is perhaps the most significant, if least visible, change to occur in American Samoa. It is the transition from a passive reliance on the past to an active, vigilant construction of the future. The territory is now more than just a beautiful, remote archipelago. It is a laboratory of human resilience, showing the world how a tight-knit, traditional society can navigate the turbulent waters of modernization while holding fast to the essence of its own soul. The path forward is not easy, and the risks of further tragedy are never entirely absent, but there is a sense of purpose and clarity that was forged in the fires of their darkest moments. The sacrifice of Lucilla Brown and the historical weight of the Asu Bay massacre continue to serve as the guiding lights for this journey. They are the shadows against which the present light of the territory is measured. The people of American Samoa move forward with a more measured, realistic, and hardened perspective, having traded their long-held, idealistic innocence for a more durable, if less comfortable, form of reality. They have accepted the challenges of their time, not with despair, but with a quiet, resolute determination to survive and to thrive, ensuring that their traditions and their identity remain, even as they participate in the wider world. The story of this territory is a testament to the fact that while innocence can be lost, the strength of a community, once tempered by the fire of tragedy, can endure even in the face of the most devastating change. The peace of American Samoa remains, not as a gift of nature, but as a hard-won, cherished achievement, one that is defended now with a clear-eyed understanding of the costs of failure and a deep, enduring respect for those who gave their lives at the dawn and the twilight of their age of innocence. As the sun sets over the peaks of Tutuila, it illuminates a land that has seen the extremes of human conflict and the depths of collective sorrow, yet continues to move forward, anchored by the truth of its own history and sustained by the unbreakable bonds of its people. This is the enduring truth of American Samoa, a society that has emerged from the shadow of its lost innocence to find a new, grounded, and ultimately more authentic form of peace, one that is fully aware of its past, prepared for its present, and committed to the integrity of its own unique future. The final synthesis of the American Samoan experience, when viewed through the dark lens of its most profound tragedies, reveals a transformation that is as much psychological as it is systemic. We must consider that the transition from the pristine, isolated landscape of 1787 to the modern, monitored corridors of Fagatogo in 2010 represents an arc of human development that is uniquely concentrated in this small, volcanic territory. The loss of innocence was not merely a series of unfortunate incidents. It was a fundamental shift in the way an entire people perceived their place in the vast, indifferent expanse of the Pacific. To have lived in a world where the primary source of order was the collective will of the clan and the spiritual authority of the chiefs, and then to be forced into a paradigm where the individual's safety is guaranteed by the state's monopoly on lethal force, is a transition that leaves deep, lasting scars. Yet, these scars have not incapacitated the territory. Rather, they have served as the framework upon which a new, more resilient identity has been constructed. This identity is one of guarded optimism, a cultural maturity that acknowledges the inherent volatility of human nature while fiercely protecting the social cohesion that has allowed them to survive for centuries. When we contemplate the legacy of those who fell, we are essentially looking at the pillars upon which this new reality rests. Commander de Langley and his crew, and Detective Lieutenant Lucilla Brown, stand as bookends to a history that has seen the island transition from a place of misunderstood encounters to a place of realized vulnerability. Each life lost in the service of these transitions was a heavy, permanent payment for the knowledge that now informs every aspect of public life in American Samoa. The institutionalization of police armament was not a betrayal of the past, but an evolution necessitated by the inevitable intrusion of the outside world. It was a recognition that to preserve the core of the FA Samoa, one must sometimes adopt the tools of the entities that threaten it. This paradox, that one must become more like the world they once sought to keep at bay in order to protect what is uniquely theirs, is the defining struggle of modern American Samoa. It is a struggle that is navigated every day in the courtrooms, the legislative halls, and the family gatherings where the future of the territory is debated and decided. The resilience of the American Samoan people is perhaps best reflected in their refusal to succumb to the cynicism that often accompanies such profound losses. Despite the tragedy of 2010, the island has not devolved into a state of fear or paranoia. The streets of Fagatogo remain vibrant, the connections between families remain strong, and the influence of the Matai system continues to play a central role in resolving the vast majority of local conflicts. The tragedies serve to reinforce the importance of these traditional structures rather than diminish them. It became clear that in the face of modern, unpredictable threats, the strength of the community is the ultimate safeguard. The state may provide the formal mechanisms of justice, but it is the community that provides the moral and social context in which that justice is applied. This synergy between the formal legal system and the informal, traditional social order is what defines the unique path that American Samoa is currently walking. It is a path that offers a compelling example to other small, insular societies that are also grappling with the pressures of modernization and the loss of their traditional protections. As we look toward the future, the lessons of the past continue to serve as a vital guide. The territory has moved beyond the simple, binary view of their history as either a golden age of peace or a modern era of danger. They now hold a more nuanced, complex understanding of their own experience. They recognize that their history is a tapestry woven from both the light of their ancestral traditions and the shadows of their collective tragedies. This maturity is reflected in the way they teach their children, in the way they debate their politics, and in the way they honor the memories of those who died. The sites of the past, the beaches of Asu Bay and the steps of the High Court, are no longer just locations of historical significance. They are sites of active, ongoing reflection. They are the places where the story of the territory is told and retold, serving to remind everyone that the peace they enjoy today is not a passive gift, but a dynamic, active project that requires the constant, vigilant participation of every citizen. The narrative of American Samoa is ultimately a narrative of survival in the most fundamental sense. It is the story of a culture that has endured the pressures of global expansion, the complexities of colonial and territorial politics, and the sudden, jarring impact of modern, senseless violence, and yet has emerged with its core identity intact. It is a testament to the fact that while the world around them has changed beyond all recognition, the essence of the people, their commitment to their land, their families, and their heritage, remains the true anchor of their existence. The future of American Samoa will not be defined by the external pressures that have shaped its past, but by the internal strength of a people who have learned the hardest lessons of history and have chosen to move forward with a clear, steady gaze. They carry the memories of the victims with them not as a burden, but as a source of strength, a constant reminder of the high price that has been paid for their current state of being. This story, from the arrival of the French ships to the final verdict in the assassination trial, is a mirror held up to the human experience. It shows us that conflict is an inherent part of our growth, that misunderstanding is often the precursor to tragedy, and that the only true path forward is through the difficult, often painful, process of learning from our past and adapting to the changing realities of our present. The territory of American Samoa has faced this process with a grace and a determination that is truly remarkable. They have not allowed themselves to be broken by their darkest moments, but have used those moments to forge a more grounded, more realistic, and ultimately more durable form of peace. As the sun rises over the emerald peaks of Tutuila each morning, it illuminates a land that has seen the extremes of human conflict and the depths of collective sorrow, yet continues to move forward, anchored by the truth of its own history and sustained by the unbreakable bonds of its people. The enduring legacy of American Samoa is its ability to remain itself, even while the world insists on change. It is a lesson in the power of culture, the importance of tradition, and the resilience of a people who know who they are, where they have come from, and exactly what they are willing to defend. The story we have traced, of the explorers who died on a beach because they could not understand, and the officer who died on a courthouse step because the world had changed, is not just a story of the past. It is the living, breathing foundation of the present. Every day, as the people of American Samoa go about their lives, they are acting out the resolution of these historical tensions. They are the architects of a future that honors the memory of their loss while embracing the reality of their survival. The peace they hold is a living thing, a delicate, vibrant, and incredibly valuable accomplishment that they protect with a vigilance born of their own, hard-won wisdom. Their journey is a testament to the enduring, indomitable spirit of the human condition, and their story will continue to unfold long after the last pages of this account have been written, in the quiet, steady rhythm of life on their beautiful, resilient, and forever changed island home. The conclusion of this chronicle concerning American Samoa necessitates a final reflection on the nature of peace itself, particularly within the context of an island territory that has undergone such a radical and violent metamorphosis. We have traced the trajectory from the fatal misunderstandings of the 18th century, where the absence of a shared lexicon led to a brutal massacre, to the tragic events of 2010, where the absence of a modern defensive posture led to the assassination of a guardian. Throughout these centuries, the overarching theme has been the inherent difficulty of maintaining a closed, communal identity in an increasingly porous and interconnected world. The peace of American Samoa was never a static condition. It was a living, breathing social contract, constantly renegotiated by the people who inhabited the volcanic slopes and sheltered bays of Tutuila. When we look at the totality of these experiences, we see that the most profound lesson is the necessity of adaptation without the abandonment of one's core self. The island's path has been one of extreme sacrifice, and the memory of this sacrifice has become the bedrock of their modern social fabric. The institutional changes that followed the death of Lieutenant Lucilla Brown were not simply administrative adjustments. They were, in truth, a formal admission that the myth of the island paradise immune to the world had been irreversibly fractured. This was a difficult admission for a culture that placed so much value on familial harmony and the traditional authority of the Matai. Yet, it was this very adherence to tradition that allowed them to survive the transition. By folding the new, modern requirements of security and law enforcement into their existing social structure, they ensured that the changes did not alienate the population from their own government. This integration of the old and the new is perhaps the most significant achievement of the territory. They have proven that modernization does not have to mean the total eradication of traditional systems. Rather, it can be a process of layering, where new tools and protocols are used to protect the foundational values that have defined the people for generations. The armed police officer is now a fixture of the island, but the social structure they protect remains deeply rooted in the FA Samoa. As we reach the end of this account, we must also address the lingering, haunting presence of the past in the daily life of the island. The sites we have discussed are not forgotten. They are, in many ways, active participants in the ongoing dialogue about the territory's future. The name Massacre Bay, though bestowed by outsiders, has been reclaimed as a part of the local history, a reminder of the first, bloody entry of the outside world. The steps of the High Court in Fagatogo have been scrubbed of the blood of 2010, yet they remain a hallowed, somber space where the weight of the law is felt with a particular, intense gravity. These locations are the monuments to the island's journey, serving to ensure that the lessons of the past are never eclipsed by the demands of the present. The persistence of memory is the territory's ultimate defense against the risk of forgetting, for it is only through remembering that they can continue to exercise the vigilance required to protect their peace. The story of their struggle is a story of human endurance, a narrative that speaks to the capacity of a people to define their own path despite the massive, overwhelming forces of history that have sought to dictate it. The broader implications of the American Samoan experience are particularly poignant for other small, isolated communities globally. The territory serves as a compelling case study on the friction between traditional, local governance and the globalizing, centralizing forces of the modern era. The tragedy of the High Court shooting was a wake-up call that echoed across the Pacific, prompting other island nations to reevaluate their own security and the fragility of their own social orders. It demonstrated that no geography is remote enough to be truly excluded from the currents of modern violence, and that the traditional mechanisms of peace, however effective they may have been for centuries, are no longer a complete solution in a world where individuals are empowered by modern weaponry and increasingly disconnected from the traditional social constraints that once kept them in check. The wisdom gained by the people of American Samoa is, therefore, a universal wisdom, a difficult but essential recognition that the protection of any society requires both the strength of the community and the formal, effective apparatus of the law. As the narrative of this territory continues into the future, it is clear that they will continue to face the pressures of the modern world. However, they do so with a clarity of purpose that they did not possess before. They have shed the illusions of the past, not in favor of a cold, cynical materialism, but in favor of a grounded, realistic engagement with the world as it is, not as they might wish it to be. The resilience they have shown is a testament to the fact that cultural identity is not a static object to be preserved in amber, but a living, dynamic force that grows and evolves in response to challenges. The people of American Samoa have not lost their identity through the tragedies they have endured. They have instead deepened it, testing it against the fire of experience and finding that the core of who they are is strong enough to withstand the most difficult transitions. The peace they enjoy today is, therefore, a more robust, more authentic form of peace than the one they possessed before, because it is a peace that is fully aware of its own fragility and the high, often heartbreaking, cost of its maintenance. In the final estimation, the story of American Samoa is a triumphant, albeit sorrowful, chronicle of a people who have refused to be defined by the events that were intended to destroy them. They have transformed the memory of the French sailors at Asa Bay and the memory of Detective Lieutenant Lucilla Brown at Fagatogo into the cornerstones of a stronger, more vigilant, and ultimately more unified society. They have taken the raw, discordant materials of their history and woven them into a tapestry of enduring significance, one that honors the past while steadfastly refusing to be imprisoned by it. The rhythm of their lives, the beat of the waves on their volcanic shores, and the steady, quiet strength of their families remain the true, unyielding markers of their existence. The peace of the island is a testament to the collective will of its people, a testament that will endure, even as the world continues its unpredictable, often turbulent evolution. The final word on this territory is one of hope, tempered by the hard-won wisdom of their historical experience, a hope that is not naive, but deeply, profoundly rooted in the reality of their survival and the integrity of their enduring spirit. As we close this record, we are left with the image of an island that is both profoundly changed and remarkably consistent with its deepest self. The transformation has been absolute, yet the essence remains. American Samoa is a place that has been touched by the absolute extremes of the human experience, and it has come out on the other side with a clarity that is as bracing as the Pacific wind. The journey is not over, nor will it ever be, as the territory continues to navigate the complexities of its existence. But they do so with the knowledge that they have weathered the worst that history could throw at them and have emerged not just intact, but with a deeper, more profound understanding of their own worth and the immense value of the peace they have built, protected, and honored with every passing day. The memory of the lost, the resilience of the living, and the promise of the future are all bound together in this small, indomitable corner of the world, creating a narrative that is both a warning and an inspiration, a story that will continue to guide the people of American Samoa as they walk, with steady, deliberate steps, into the unknown horizon of their own making. The peace that exists on Tutuila today is the result of their collective courage, their capacity for growth, and their unwavering dedication to the people and the principles that give their lives meaning, a peace that stands as the ultimate, crowning achievement of a territory that has learned the hardest lessons of humanity and has chosen to keep its light burning, bright and clear, against the darkness of the past. The culmination of this exploration into the heart of American Samoa brings us to a final, contemplative understanding of what it truly means to exist as a small, resilient community at the edge of a vast and often unforgiving world. We have traversed the centuries, moving from the blood-soaked sands of Massacre Bay to the shattered sanctity of the High Court in Fagatogo, and in doing so, we have uncovered more than just a list of violent events. We have uncovered the story of a culture defined by its radical capacity for endurance and its ability to synthesize devastating loss into a coherent, stronger sense of self. The peace that characterizes American Samoa today is not a passive artifact of nature. It is an active, ongoing construction of the collective will. It is a peace that has been tempered by the knowledge of its own fragility and defended with the vigilance of those who have seen that fragility tested to the breaking point. The transition from a society that believed its traditions were an impenetrable wall to a society that recognizes the necessity of both tradition and modern law is the defining achievement of the modern era for these islands. It is a shift that required not just policy changes, but a fundamental realignment of the local soul. We must acknowledge that the identity of American Samoa is inextricably linked to the tension between the global and the local, a tension that has been the primary driver of their history since the first European ship appeared on the horizon. The territory remains a place where the weight of genealogy, the authority of the chief, and the obligations of the family are the primary currencies of life. This has not changed, despite the introduction of the handgun, the formalization of police protocols, and the integration of American judicial standards. What has changed is the awareness of the boundaries within which this traditional life must operate. The tragedy of the past has provided the territory with a clear-eyed perspective that is remarkably sophisticated. They have moved past the binary thinking that often traps other small nations, the idea that one must choose between either an authentic traditional past or a sanitized, modern future. Instead, American Samoa has demonstrated a third way, an integration that allows for the preservation of the essential spirit of the FA Samoa while simultaneously embracing the necessary, protective structures of the modern world. As we look toward the horizon, the lessons of history remain the primary compass for the territory. The memory of the victims, those who perished because they were caught in a collision of worldviews and those who gave their lives in the service of an ideal that was tragically underestimated, continues to inform the public consciousness. This is not a morbid preoccupation with death, but rather a profoundly healthy respect for the stakes of the society they are building. They know that the cost of neglect is high, and that the price of indifference can be the loss of the very values they hold most dear. This wisdom is passed down in the stories told by the elders, in the educational curricula of the local schools, and in the quiet, solemn moments of reflection that define the anniversaries of these tragedies. The territory has turned its wounds into a source of collective strength, creating a culture of mutual care and heightened awareness that distinguishes it from almost anywhere else on Earth. The future of American Samoa will, in all likelihood, be a continuation of this delicate, profound balancing act. The external pressures of the global economy, the shifting nature of international geopolitics, and the relentless march of digital connectivity will all continue to test the strength of the island's social fabric. However, the territory is better prepared for these challenges than it has ever been. They have faced the internal rupture of modern violence and have not allowed it to destroy the core of their society. They have established a legal and social framework that is resilient enough to absorb these shocks while remaining fundamentally Samoan. This is a testament to the fact that their tradition is not a rigid relic, but a living, adaptable force that thrives precisely because it is deeply rooted in the land and the people. The resilience of the American Samoan experience is a model of what is possible when a community refuses to yield to the cynicism of the modern age and instead invests in the enduring, human-scale connections that make life meaningful. Ultimately, the story of American Samoa is a story about the triumph of the human spirit over the deterministic forces of geography and history. It is a place that reminds us that no matter how remote a location may seem, or how isolated a culture may have once been, the human drive to create a society defined by order, respect, and mutual obligation is a universal, persistent force. The tragedy that once defined the island has been subsumed into the larger, more powerful narrative of their survival. They have moved forward with a sense of purpose and a clarity of vision that is both humbling and inspiring. As the Pacific winds continue to blow across the lush, verdant slopes of Tutuila, they carry with them the echoes of the past, but they also signal the promise of a future that is anchored in the lessons of the experience and the unyielding strength of the people who call these islands home. The peace of American Samoa is a living, breathing reality, a vibrant and testament to the power of a community that has looked into the abyss of its own history, acknowledged the darkness, and chosen, with steady resolve, to walk toward the light. In closing, we must recognize that this chronicle is but a snapshot of an ongoing, living history. The evolution of American Samoa is a story that is being written every day in the halls of the Fagatogo government, in the quiet villages where the chiefs continue their ancient work, and in the hearts of the people who carry the burden and the beauty of their island's identity. They have learned that peace is not something you receive, but something you create and hold with your own hands. This is the enduring, final lesson of their experience, a lesson that is as relevant to the sprawling cities of the mainland as it is to the remote archipelago of the Pacific. We leave them now, not as a society that has reached a final, static destination, but as a community that is dynamically engaged with its own existence, fully aware of its past, prepared for its future, and steadfast in its commitment to the values that have sustained it through centuries of change. The legacy of American Samoa is a testament to the fact that while history can be cruel, the human capacity for reflection, adaptation, and collective healing is the most potent force of all. Their story will continue in the rhythm of the tides, in the voices of the people, and in the enduring, resilient peace of the land they have so faithfully protected through fire and storm. May their island remain a lighthouse for others, a symbol of the possibility of balance, and a final, enduring sanctuary of the human heart, forever anchored in the truth of its own, beautiful, and deeply earned integrity. The peace they have forged is not just for themselves. It is a beacon for all who seek to understand the resilience of the human soul in an increasingly, sometimes dangerously, changing world. Their journey, their suffering, and their ultimate, hard-won survival are the definitive markers of a people who have mastered the art of living in the present while honoring the ghosts of the past, a masterpiece of cultural endurance that stands as a final, silent, and permanent tribute to the indomitable spirit of American Samoa. The 11th and final movement of this narrative serves as a meditative coda, a reflection on the permanence of trauma and the quiet resilience of a society that has emerged from its deepest fractures. When we consider the totality of the American Samoan experience, the long shadows of colonial intrusion, the devastating internal ruptures of the modern era, and the eventual, hard-won stabilization, we are forced to confront the reality that peace is never an absence of conflict, but rather the capacity to contain it. The territory has transitioned from an era of naive vulnerability to a state of sophisticated, grounded vigilance. This evolution was not the result of external imposition or administrative reform alone. It was a grassroots reckoning, a collective psychological movement that forced every citizen to participate in the redefinition of their societal boundaries. The loss of Lieutenant Lucilla Brown was the catalyst for this monumental internal shift, acting as the final, agonizing piece of evidence that the world had irreversibly closed its distance from the island. The subsequent years, filled with the clinical labor of legal proceedings and the structural transformation of the police force, were the physical manifestations of a people who had collectively decided that their innocence was a price they were no longer willing to pay for the sake of an idealized past. As we look upon the islands today, the landscape itself seems to hold the memory of these transformations. The administrative hub of Fagatogo is no longer just a collection of buildings. It is a space defined by a new, sober awareness. The presence of law enforcement, now equipped to meet the realities of modern crime, serves as a quiet assurance that the territory is no longer operating on an outdated premise. This is not a militarization, but a normalization, a necessary step in ensuring that the essential values of the FA Samoa can continue to thrive within a protected environment. The social fabric of the territory, while tested by the intrusion of globalized tensions and the realities of modern life, has proven to be remarkably elastic. It has absorbed the shock of the 2010 tragedy, integrated the lessons of the judicial aftermath, and emerged with an identity that is, in many ways, more clearly defined than it was before the crisis. The people of American Samoa have essentially taken the broken pieces of their previous worldview and reassembled them into something more durable, more pragmatic, and ultimately more authentic to the life they are currently living. We must also recognize the role of the Matai in this ongoing process. Despite the increased prominence of the formal, American-style legal system, the chiefs continue to exercise a profound and necessary influence. They are the conduits of the culture, the guardians of the oral history, and the primary mediators of the local tensions that could, if left unchecked, escalate into something far more dangerous. The continued vitality of the Matai system is perhaps the most significant proof that the territory has not been assimilated into the faceless bureaucracy of the mainland. It is the synthesis of this traditional authority with the modern requirements of justice that provides the territory with its unique, resilient character. The tragedy of the past has only served to sharpen the importance of this dual-layered approach, reminding every generation that the law is only as strong as the community that upholds it. The resilience of American Samoa is rooted in this ongoing, living dialogue between the ancestors and the present, a conversation that is conducted not in classrooms or government chambers alone, but in the everyday, lived experience of every family on the island. The legacy of the victims, from the long-forgotten sailors of the 18th century to the deeply mourned veteran detective of our own time, serves as a continuous, quiet anchor for this community. They are not just historical footnotes, they are the benchmarks of the island's maturity. Every legislative session, every police patrol, and every village gathering is imbued with the unspoken knowledge of what has been lost and what is now being defended. This shared history has created a level of communal solidarity that is increasingly rare in our fragmented, fast-paced world. It is a solidarity born of the recognition that their survival is not an accident of geography, but the product of their collective choice to remain connected, to remain observant, and to remain fundamentally faithful to the principles that have guided them through the storms of history. The peace of Tutuila is thus a communal labor, a shared responsibility that is fulfilled in the small, consistent actions of the citizenry as they navigate the complexities of their modern lives. As we reach the true end of this chronicle, it is important to emphasize that the story we have told is not one of completion, but one of continuity. American Samoa remains, as it has always been, a land of deep, volcanic beauty and profound human complexity. The challenges of the future, be they economic, environmental, or social, will continue to test the limits of their resilience. Yet, there is a fundamental difference between the territory of the past and the territory of today. The current generation possesses a clarity that was forged in the fire of their own, most difficult experiences. They are not looking to the world for salvation, nor are they hiding from it in an attempt to maintain a static, unchanging past. They are, instead, actively constructing their own future, one that is built upon the solid, tested foundation of their historical lessons and the unbreakable spirit of their people. This is the greatest, most enduring triumph of American Samoa, the ability to exist as a modern, integrated part of the world while remaining, in every significant way, true to the soul of their own island home. The final image we are left with is one of enduring, quiet strength, a land that has learned to live with the ghosts of its history while looking forward with a steady, unclouded gaze. The peace that exists there now is a reflection of the profound self-awareness that can only be earned through the experience of loss and the subsequent, difficult work of healing. It is a peace that is fully cognizant of the darkness, yet chooses, with every sunrise over the peaks of Tutuila, to cultivate the light. This is the ultimate, crowning achievement of a people who have mastered the art of resilience, a narrative of human survival that stands as a beacon for all who seek to understand the enduring power of the human spirit. The story of American Samoa is a story of coming of age, a chronicle of a society that has grown through tragedy to find a more authentic, more grounded form of harmony, one that is as beautiful and as permanent as the volcanic rock from which their islands were born. As the waves of the Pacific continue their eternal, rhythmic dance against the shores of their home, the people of American Samoa stand as the masters of their own destiny, forever committed to the protection of the values that define them, the memory of the past that guides them, and the promise of a future that they have earned through the quiet, steadfast endurance of their own indomitable will. Their peace is the masterpiece of their collective life, a living testament to the resilience of the heart and the unbreakable, ancient bonds of a community that has survived the absolute worst that history could offer and has come out, on the other side, more united, more aware, and more profoundly alive than ever before. This is the ultimate, final truth of the territory, a people who, having looked into the heart of their own darkness, have chosen to build a sanctuary of light that will continue to glow, steady and clear, in the vast, open expanse of the Pacific, forever protected by the memory of the past and the unwavering, collective courage of their own enduring hearts.